Many of us, at one point or another, have felt stuck in something. Stuck in old habits, stuck in past mistakes, stuck in traditions that no longer serve us. Maybe we are stuck in anger, guilt, regret, or even in the rigid understanding of faith. We often recognize how these patterns shaped our past, yet we struggle to see how they continue to bind us today. The Pharisees in today's gospel lesson offer a striking reflection of this same struggle. Today's gospel lesson begins with warning. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." On the surface, it seems like these Pharisees are concerned for Jesus' safety. But looking deeper, we realize their warning does not come from genuine concern. Instead, it comes from fear. Fear of change, fear of losing power, fear of a faith that is active and free rather than bound by rules. The Pharisees were so caught up in their own sense of rightness that they failed to see God right in front of them. Just before today's lesson, in Luke chapter 13, verse 10 through 17, Jesus heals a woman who had been suffering for 18 years. When Jesus healed the woman, the Pharisees were outraged rather than celebrating her freedom from her ailment. Why? Why? Because Jesus healed her on the Sabbath day. Their devotion to religious law blinded them to the miracle before them. They were struck. They were stuck in a mindset that valued rules over compassion. Stuck in a faith that was rigid instead of transformative. They didn't even know what they didn't know. This kind of being stuck is not just ancient story. It is happening today. We see it in our communities, in our relationships, in our politics, and even in our churches. We see people clinging to old divisions rather than working toward reconciliation. We see institutions resisting necessary change. We see individuals trapped in cycles of guilt, shame, and self-doubt, unable to accept the grace that has always been available to them. A few years ago, before the COVID pandemic, I visited an elderly church member with my senior pastor. He was a veteran, a man in his 90s, who had carried a deep burden for most of his life. As we sat with him, he confessed his pain, his voice trembling as he spoke. I carry a heavy guilt because I may have taken lives during the Vietnam War. And I watched so many of my comrades die right in front of me. I've spent my whole life wondering, why did I survive when they didn't? I don't understand why I have suffered with this guilt for so long. Now, in my 90s and facing the end of my days, I am afraid. Afraid that God won't save me. He had been suffering from PTSD for over half a century. He was stuck in a moment long past, stuck in shame, stuck in the belief that grace was beyond his reach. The pastor knelt beside him, gently placing her hands on his withered cheeks, looking into his tear-filled eyes. With a voice full of compassion, she whispered, "You are not lost. You are not forgotten. You are loved. You deserve to be saved and to go to heaven. Your comrades who passed before you, they are not angry. They are grateful. They know you have carried their memory, prayed for them, and honored them all these years. That's why you survived. You were meant to live, to remember, and to love." As she prayed with him, tears streamed down his face, and I could see his face softened with peace. A week later, he passed away. But he left this world freed from the burden he had carried for so long. How many of us carry burdens that God never meant for us to carry? How many of us are weighed down by past failures, by shame, by the fear that we are not enough? How many of us, like the Pharisees, resist the transformative power of grace because it challenges the way we have always understood the world? Jesus' lament in today's passage is not just for Jerusalem. It is for all of us. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. Jesus' lament is not one of condemnation. It is a crying of longing. He desires to gather us, to protect us, and to love us. But so often, we are not willing. We resist His love because it asks us to let go of our pride, our fears, and our need for control. This struggle is visible in today's world. We see people trapped in cycles of hate, refusing to reconcile with those they see as other. We see families divided over political or religious differences. We see entire communities burdened by systematic injustices that no one is willing to confront. And yet, Jesus still stands with open arms, longing to gather us in. Jesus' lament over Jerusalem came just before his greatest sacrifice, just before his death on the cross. He was about to enter Jerusalem for the last time, to give his life for us. There was no time to waste. And even as he faced rejection, he proclaimed his love. How often have I desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. This morning, let's remember this. Jesus longs to gather us, no matter what we are stuck in. When you feel lost, he seeks you. When you feel unworthy, he calls you worthy. When you feel burdened by your past, he offers you a future. When you feel alone, he spreads his wings and says, "Come home." No matter how stuck we have become, no matter how far we have wandered, there is always a place for us at the table of the Lord. But Jesus' invitation is not just personal, it is communal. He calls us not only to be gathered, but also to be gatherers. If we have experienced this grace, then we are called to extend it to others, to our neighbors. We must be willing to break free from the barriers that divide us. We must be willing to engage with those who think differently from us. We must be willing to let go of our need to be right in order to embrace the calling of love. So let our prayers, even our prayers of confession, be filled with thanksgiving for grace that never runs out, for love that never lets go. Let us be inspired today to love more, to risk more, to reach out more, to include more. Because Jesus is still calling, still gathering, still loving us. Just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, may we be willing to run to Jesus. Amen.